The Earth has a deadline. Let's make it a lifeline. These are the words on the climate clock in New York's Union Square. Instead of measuring the time of day, this clock measures the time remaining to reduce carbon emissions and mitigate the catastrophic effects of climate change. Every day we are faced with signs that we are reaching a tipping point for our planet and our collective society. Humanity is an astonishing species. We've made incredible and rapid advances in human health, in transport, in energy, food production, and infrastructure. Even this event is a marvel. Despite the pandemic forcing us apart, we can communicate effectively and instantly across huge distances. We have made all of these advances over the last few hundred years, a period that in evolutionary terms is but a blink of the eye. But in our haste to adopt new technologies that made our lives better, we didn't actually think through the long-term consequences. And now we are paying the price. Our high carbon and resource-intensive economic models are warming the planet. They are destroying nature and biodiversity, undermining the foundations of our existence and contributing to the emergence of COVID-19. They are polluting the air, the land, the sea. They're increasing inequality, as those with least access to the benefits of human development are the ones who suffer the most from its unwelcome side effects. So today, I want to talk about what we can do to change for the future, what we can do to transform our society so they can operate in harmony with nature, how we can leverage the topics of sustainability and environment, social, and governance, also known as ESG, for the future benefit of our planet and humanity. ESG has been in the public consciousness for a few years now, but it's fair to say that 2020 and 2021 has seen a huge uptick in awareness. A pandemic might have been a trigger. As countries systematically locked down, we saw unexpected improvements in the environment. The younger generation is engaged in this conversation. And besides protesting and voting, they're now using their investment dollars to do their talking. So can we finally say that far from being a passing interest, ESG is actually here to stay? My answer is yes, it is. Today, investors watch company decision-making through different lenses, with impact and ESG investing estimated to be $20 to $30 trillion of assets under management. Now, this is not the first global crisis or moment of high market volatility that most organizations have faced in recent years. However, the nature of uncertainty is different. It involves health and well-being rather than climate, technology, or other issues, making the challenges feel far more personal and far less predictable. An observation frequently attributed to Winston Churchill is that we should never let a good crisis go to waste. The coronavirus outbreak is a deeply unfortunate situation that is unquestionably causing widespread suffering. We know this. While this is regrettable, we should not dismiss that the event provides an opportunity to make some significant headway towards a timely and necessary ESG transition. So ESG, what does it mean? You must be wondering. You'll often hear ESG and sustainability in the same sentence. In some cases, you might even find them being used interchangeably. So what is the E? The impact of business practices on the environment has been in the headline for many years, particularly in relation to climate change and pollution. And there appears to be a bit more focus on the environment within ESG because it is generally a much larger area than social themes such as education and housing. When you think of the environment, it covers utility, energy, and industrials. It's a bigger universe from which to come up with a viable investment strategy, and also reflects the fact that there's been a lot of focus on the environmental issues. The S. This category covers community and employee relations, including human rights abuse, discrimination, community impact and involvement, employee treatment, and of course, occupational health and safety. Another metric to determine if a company is a good steward of the S is to look for an engaged and happy workplace. Is the company a sought-after employer? What kinds of policies and programs are in place to attract and retain your workers? Companies that score well on these questions have a competitive advantage over others. And that brings me to the last one, which is the G. When analyzing ESG factors, the G element is often forgotten amid considerations over climate, risk, societal expectations, and other E and S risks and opportunities. But understanding governance risks and opportunities in decision-making is critical, as poor corporate governance practices have stood at the core of some of the biggest corporate scandals in India and around the world. An example, Volkswagen's emissions test scandal, Facebook's misuse of data, and other recent incidents have caused significant damage, financial damage, to these companies. So in the face of companies' missteps in expanding awareness of global diversity and income inequality, corporate governance is a core component of ESG. 10 years ago, ESG was a grassroots initiative. Today, it is top-down. 10 years ago, issues of ESG like measuring your carbon footprint, being socially responsive, ethical supply chains, they may have been championed by activist employees or customers, but they were not necessarily a business objective for most organizations. What a difference a decade has made. Social change, advances in technology, and the ability to provide a return on investment has elevated issues of ESG. So these are now hot topics in the boardroom and increasingly a requirement for investors, employees, and customers in India and around the world. So you might be wondering, why does ESG matter? If we needed a more immediate reminder of the significance of ESG, the 2021 proxy season delivered one. First, there are the shareholder proposals. Climate proposals received record support. In 2021, 98% of General Electric's shareholders approved a resolution asking the company to explain how it intends to achieve net zero emissions. Recently, we all watched with varying degrees of astonishment as climate activists won 3 seats on ExxonMobil's board during an annual meeting that produced what some have called the proxy heard around the world. So whatever one's views regarding activist investors or a corporation's role with respond to ESG or climate change or diversity, these turn of events has focused the attention of directors everywhere. There's a lot of polls, and there was a recent survey from one poll that showed around 62% of us would opt to put our savings and pensions to work in investments that positively impact both society and the environment. Amongst millennials, and I'm sure there's many of you in the audience, 86% say that sustainability is a priority when it comes to their investments. Morningstar tracked a 4 times increase in ESG assets from 2018 to 2019 alone, from $5.5 billion to $20.6 billion. ESG investing now counts for $1 in $4. ESG, and in particular ESG investing, can no longer be categorized as the future of investing. It is a reality today, just as issues such as climate change, cybersecurity, data protection, workplace diversity and inclusion, and better stakeholder alignment are now widely accepted as vital for better corporate citizenship and better social outcomes. ESG has had a big impact on industries. The COVID pandemic has presented an unforeseen challenge to industrial operators as they face the immediate impact of plummeting demand for many products, as well as the pressing needs to ensure the safety of their people. Yet, even as industries grapple with structural changes, and as societies and economies pivot to what we call the next normal, companies themselves have a window of opportunity to adapt their operations to help reduce the disruption that ESG issues like climate change will ultimately bring. So these range from introducing hybrid electric equipment and fully electrifying operations to boosting efficiency through digitization, advanced analytics, and artificial intelligence. So to what extent does ESG translate into good financial performance? On that, there has been more than 2,000 academic studies, and around 70% of them find a positive relationship between ESG scores on the one hand and financial returns on the other, whether measured by equity returns or profitability or valuation multiples. Increasingly, another element is the cost of capital. Evidence is emerging that a better ESG score translates to about a 10% lower cost of capital, as the risks that affect your business in terms of its license to operate are reduced if you have a strong ESG value proposition. Regulatory compliance is another positive impact from ESG. If ESG regulations don't affect you yet, they will soon. And in India, it's starting. State and global regulations and anticipated federal regulations requires a lot of data collection and reporting on ESG issues. It's very attractive to investors. ESG investors want to incorporate values such as responding to climate into their portfolio. In addition to the traditional factors of profitability, consumer mandates are now seeking out ESG-specific opportunities. You would have heard of BlackRock. According to their first global client sustainable investing survey, $23 billion was invested in ESG companies in 2020, compared to $500 million in 2019. Let me repeat that one more time. 23 billion in 2020, $500 million in 2019. Now, there are many challenges we face when trying to make ESG implementation. The first one is economic and financial. This is important. Economists observe that the dominating development model tends to focus on economic growth as precedence rather than people's rights or welfare and environmental processes and limits. This requires a shift in the worldview from treating the environment as part of the economy to treating the economy as part of the environment. Strategically, this means the economy should be adapted to ensure environmental services are maintained. Another barrier is innovation. In the educational sector, for example, there's a lack of innovation-oriented research. And this means that there has to be a closer connection between research institutes and the economy, which would also overcome problems concerning the knowledge transfer to applications in real life. You've got a social barrier. Population growth, paired with unsustainable consumption and production patterns among the wealthy, are the biggest social challenges to achieving sustainable development in this world. And the last one is political barriers. Inadequate economic, social, and environmental methods for policies, plans, and projects are the major barrier combating the implementation of sustainable development. So how would the world look like if we achieved a sustainable future? Over the next 30 years, we know we'll face rapid population growth and greater pressures on our natural resources. The statistics are quite sobering. With 9.7 billion people on the planet by 2050, we can expect a 54% increase in global food demand and 56% increase in energy demand. While meeting these growing demands and achieving sustainability is possible, it is helpful to scrutinize where the status quo will get us. So to put it simply, if we stay on today's current path, we risk being trapped in an intensifying cycle of scarcity. Our growth opportunities severely capped and our natural landscapes severely degraded. So under this business as usual scenario, we can expect global temperature to rise 3.2 degrees Celsius, worsened air pollution that will affect 5 billion more people, overfishing of 84% of fish stocks, and greater water scarcity affecting 3 billion people. Habitat loss will continue, leaving less than 50% of native grasslands and several types of forests intact. Now that is scary. However, if we make changes in where and how we meet food, water, and energy demands for the same growing global population and wealth, the picture can actually look quite different by mid-century. This sustainability path includes a global temperature increase limited to 1.6 degrees, zero overfishing with greater fishery yields, a 90% drop in dangerous levels of air pollution, fewer water-stressed people, rivers, and fields, and these goals can actually be met while natural habitats extend both inside and outside protected areas. So I'm sure a lot of you are wondering something. Can one person really make a difference? I'm sure you're wondering this, and rightfully so, how one of you could possibly make some sort of a meaningful difference in what seems to be like an enormous problem. You're just one person after all. Now there are 7.6 billion people on our planet today. So if you're not an elected official or a CEO, you probably don't have too much influence, right? Does what you do really make any difference in the fight against climate change? Now, these are great questions, which I'm sure you're thinking. Lucky for us, our everyday actions really do make a difference in the fight for a more sustainable planet for a few reasons. Firstly, the size of an individual's footprint is mind-boggling. Although you're just one person, the size of your footprint may surprise you. Each person emits 19 tons of carbon per year on average. High-income countries tend to have bigger carbon footprints. Now, to keep the temperature increase somewhat close to 2 degrees, the average footprint of everyone in the world needs to be approaching 0 to 2 tons by 2050. Your contribution may be a small piece of the pie overall, but you alone can actually prevent many tons of greenhouse gas from entering the atmosphere just by changing a few habits. By eliminating a quarter or half of your emissions, you could prevent hundreds of tons of greenhouse gas emissions from entering the atmosphere over the course of your life. So our impact over a lifetime does really add up. The second thing is that the micro dictates the macro. As individuals, we are the micro. By that I mean we are a small part of the much bigger whole of how society works, which is the macro. It may seem like the macro players, such as governments and corporations, have all the power, but let's not forget that they exist to serve us. That is their reason for being. So if they aren't taking those steps to fight poverty or climate change by minimizing emissions that they have control over, they're not really providing us with the value we should expect from them. The third one is the ripple effect. As Jim Rohn famously said, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Now, the inverse of this is also true. The people you spend time with will also take on a part of you. This means that you personally contribute to the makeup of other people, who they are, how they think, and how they act. Not only does this make any intuitive sense, but there is strong research to back up how influential our way of thinking and actions are to others. Sustainability can and will start to spread rapidly once it gets going. If just one person starts acting sustainably, if you start acting sustainably, others are sure to follow suit. You won't even know all the people that you influence, but by being the change you wish to see, you will have an outsized impact and help to build the momentum in this fight against climate change, against poverty, against water insecurity, etc. As Henry Ford said, what people believe will ultimately become our self-fulfilling prophecy. Whatever you choose to do in your daily life has an outsized impact in humanity's fight against climate change. Your actions not only determine how much emissions or carbon you physically put in the atmosphere, but also, more importantly, your words and actions influencing others. So now you can choose to be a part of the solution or do nothing and be a part of the problem. Unfortunately, those are the only 2 options we have. You have to pick one or the other because doing nothing is a decision in itself. Your actions do matter. Mahatma Gandhi said, be the change you wish to see in the world. And so in conclusion, what is this ESG obligation? ESG norms have moved from the margin to the center stage. ESG compliance has become an increasingly complex and challenging regulatory environment for companies to navigate. The challenge lies in building and demonstrating a culture of ESG compliance. Institutional investors such as sovereign wealth funds are increasingly taking a role in ensuring ESG compliance by voting for ESG changes at AGMs and even withdrawing their investments where companies are seen to be lacking. One example is the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, the largest such fund in the world. With global investments of approximately 800 billion pounds, the fund owns approximately 1.3% of global equities. This fund has recently focused on excessive CEO pay and voting rights. It refuses to invest in companies that fail to live up to environmental and ethical standards, including tobacco companies and manufacturers of certain weapons. Some publicly listed companies, approximately 100 to date, have been banned from this fund for breaching human rights and causing environmental damage. Recently, there has been a move by regulators to impose liability for compliance on entire organizations, not just on individuals. And this has meant that companies have to be able to show a global culture of ESG compliance and avoid structural issues that lead to non-compliance. It's more important than ever for companies to have comprehensive ESG policies in place. Moving from intention to results is the next evolution that investors will be looking for. And the only way to outperform in this new era will be for companies to make material ESG issues central to their strategy and operations, to go above and beyond their competitors, and then to measure and communicate their superior performance. So the more we can have open, thoughtful, and well-researched dialogue on the specifics of these issues, the more companies, investors, and stakeholders, all of y'all, will benefit. It's more critical than ever for boards to explore how to integrate ESG and sustainability into their governance practices and consider specifically what is best for the companies that they oversee. And that's because, and I hope you'll forgive me for using one last quote, as Yogi Berra said, if you don't know where you're going, you might wind up someplace else. Availability of finance is a key challenge in facilitating systemic transitions. Simply put, what gets financed gets done. What gets money gets done. So we must keep our ambitions high and act accordingly with the right sense of urgency and intellectual rigor. We all, I suspect, will become ESG investors in the end. Thank you.